Hey there, folks. Welcome to the Sunday edition of the Whitfield Report. Very rare Sunday show, but we're here nonetheless. I'm your host, Sam Whitfield, recording live here from South Florida, joined by the legend Christian Bladt out in Southern California. You can follow Christian on Twitter and Instagram at ChristianDMZ, and he is the host of the Bladtcast and the Dennis Miller Option. And Christian, how many podcasts do you do now? Because you have a whole bunch more.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I, of course, co-host the Dennis Miller Option. If I hosted the Dennis Miller Option, that would be false advertising. Dennis Miller hosts the Dennis Miller Option. But I do my part to try to contribute to the fun over there. And let's see. So obviously I've been doing the Bladtcast for a long time. And that's my name's spelled a little bit weird. It's BLADTCAST.com if you wanted to find out more. I've been doing that for more than 7 years. We're at... they tell you in podcasting don't number your episodes, but that's the first thing I started doing. We're at episode 373, so it's a lot. It's and God bless him. One of our listeners has gone back and started listening to all of them from number one, and he'll send me little updates. And I don't know why someone would do that, but so I have that one. And right now, under quarantine conditions, I'm doing more than I used to. It used to be about once a week. There have been weeks where I've done as many as 3. Because it's sort of like fun to catch up with friends, so I'm using it that way. I'll use Zoom to talk to somebody, and then it's like, well, we're just going to record it for the podcast. And some of them are people that have been on the podcast before anyway. But, the guys I usually do it with, I try to talk to them a couple times a month. But so I have that. And then I do shows for a network called AfterBuzz TV that was started by entertainment reporter Maria Menounos and her husband, Kevin Undergaro.
Sure.
And so a lot of those shows, it kind of depends on the time of the year. Like I did one for Star Trek Picard. I did one for Curb Your Enthusiasm, but obviously I'm not doing either of those right now. So right now I have 2 shows that I do for them. One is weekly. It's called Marvel Movie News. That's Thursdays at 4 Eastern, 1 Pacific over on the Popcorn Talk. And, we talk about Marvel movies and Marvel comics and Marvel TV. And, the news is only trickling out right now.
Sure.
Under normal circumstances, we'd be ramping up for Black Widow, probably getting to a press screening within the next week. And instead, it's just sort of like, well, when will there ever be any more movies?
Right.
And then I do a very lighthearted discussion about politics once a week called The Trump Report, which, due to scheduling, we do right now Tuesdays at 2 Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. And it's, I'm a little bit down the middle on things. And all of the other panelists are all super lefties, and so I find myself making points that I don't even believe in. Where I'm just like, well, what about the people who say this? Just because I'm looking out for people who disagree with what they're saying.
Right.
And there's things they say that I agree with. There's things that they say that I absolutely, completely disagree with. But it's just like, well, I couldn't find anybody at that network who. I could find people who were conservative. I didn't find anybody that wanted to go on camera and talk about it. And I understand that because these are all people, for the most part, they're all in their early 20s, mid 20s, and they're starting out their careers. And that's not something that they really want to go on record as like, oh, yeah, you're that guy that likes Trump. I mean, if it had been 10 years ago and it's like, oh, you're that guy who voted for McCain or Romney, it was a little different. But now it's like, oh, you're a Trump guy. I don't even want to talk to you. So I get it that people don't want to talk about their politics as much. I mean, unless you're doing a show that is politically geared, but a lot of them, they have aspirations to be in entertainment or, like entertainment sports, like wrestling and UFC. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. Like, you just got to keep the politics out of it. It's too bad because the people that I know who are conservative leaning would be really good on that show. And that's the part that's frustrating. But so that's really all technically right now, I just have 4 podcasts. But that's a lot. It's a lot to have 4.
Yeah.
And Dennis's is 2 days a week. So, that's there's a lot of time that I'm deaf for people that are watching this. I assume some people are listening and some people are watching. People who are watching, you can see I'm in this bunker. It's at the back of the garage. I'm under my house, my townhouse. And I'm surrounded by, I have all these boxes of old comics and videotapes and stuff. So it's I've found a very comfortable spot to do this because I have 2 small children. And sometimes you'll hear them running around right above my head. You'll hear them yelling or crying. But the having this spot has made it a lot easier to do. And that's probably why I've done so many Bladtcasts of late. And that's why Sam and I are talking at what is 8 a.m. my time. It was like, yep, that's actually the best time of the day on Sunday for me. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you for doing this. I think we've actually tried to get this, podcast going on and off for about, 4 years. I think we've actually been trying to coordinate this longer than either of your 2 kids have been on this earth. So.
Yeah, it's definitely been that long. It got a little tricky at that point. Yeah, and then I just wrote to you recently. I'm like, wait, I've never done your podcast. I'm a jerk because you've been on the Bladtcast. You've recorded voicemails and things like that. I know I was in the chat a couple times on your show because it would be like special episodes and stuff, and I've said hi, but that's not nearly enough. So I am glad that we're finally doing this.
Yeah, I think you came in one time when I had new Larry O'Connor, aka Michael Hausum, on the show.
Yeah.
Which is all
Michael Hausum, who's like completely out of the politics game. He's like all real estate all the time. He doesn't really post about anything anymore except he had a show for a little while. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so that's kind of the interesting thing. I didn't want to jump into this right away, but it's interesting that you mentioned other politicos in their 20s who don't really want to get involved, because that's kind of where I'm at. I started off, doing this podcast strictly, politically, and then after 2016, things got so dicey with some of the, characters kind of on the, alt-right spectrum popping up, who are kind of in my same age group, and it kind of became like, I don't really want to get associated with these types of, characters anymore. So, it's interesting that you bring that up, because one of the things that I'm kind of known for is I'm one of the first people who interviewed Ben Shapiro before he got real famous, and the reason why I interviewed Ben back in 2012 was because I'm a huge fan of Andrew Breitbart, and I happen to know that you actually knew Andrew. In fact, that's actually how I found Dennis, was because way back in the day, Breitbart tweeted something out like, hey, I'll be on the Dennis Miller show, guest hosting, and that was the first time I tuned into Dennis. I can't remember the exact date, but it was one of the shows that Andrew filled in for him, I think. So, and that's how I found you subsequently.
Yeah, and I know I knew Andrew because of Dennis. I actually met him in 2004. He was a guest on Dennis's CNBC TV show, which is how I met Dennis, which is also how I met my wife. And I met Andrew there because he was a regular guest, because he was 1, 2, outspoken, and most importantly, 3, great on television. So he would be on all the time, and I got to know him really well. And a few years later, when we started the radio show, I would just have him on, I wanted him on as a guest, and I talked him into guest hosting. He never guest hosted a whole show, and there was a little bit of anxiety about, like, how do I fill 3 hours? And I'm like, Andrew, come on, the way you talk, it's like you're going to turn on the mic, and before you know it, it's going to be over. And then also, commercial radio is, I don't want to say it's easy, but it's a lot easier to approach, because it's like I'm going to talk for 8 minutes, and then I have to take a break, and then I'm going to talk for 5 minutes and take a break. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to do a podcast for 2 hours. I have to really have it all mapped out before I start, because I'm not going to break. So, and he was great. He always brought along, friends either in studio or on the phone. We had some great guests. And yeah, so I got to know Andrew really well even before the radio show, but definitely having him in studio, really producing those shows with him, is how I got to know him. I knew Andrew well enough that, he was at my wedding. We actually had a table that was him and Salman, who used to be on the radio show, and Sabes and Munga, those behind the scenes guys from that show. So it was basically like Andrew was filling in for Dennis at my wedding as well. Like, he guest hosted the table at my wedding. I have a great picture. I've posted it on Facebook a couple of times. It's a great picture of myself, my wife, and then Andrew and the rest of those guys. So I knew him really well. And obviously what I always like to point out about Andrew is that, yes, politics is very important to him. You could have a great conversation about that. But my most memorable, most fun times were, one, talking baseball with him. And I think I have the autographed copy of his book that I have, Righteous Indignation. He actually wrote something along, I'd have to dig it out in one of these boxes. It's probably like right in front of me, but it basically says something about like, you love Andre Ethier, one of the marginal players for the Dodgers that I didn't like, that I think that history has proven me correct on. He wasn't actually that good. He was just a fan favorite.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, I would go to, I would go to a lot of Dodger games with him. I have some very memorable memories of being at games in the playoffs where the Dodgers got eliminated. Some of it was very brutal to have to sit through. But and just his excitement for everything was really infectious. And I loved talking baseball with him. He had great stories and memories, but it was just fun to be at a game. And he was so funny. That was the thing that I think people who knew Andrew knew how funny he was. But like myself, Andrew, and Steve Hayes, who used to write for the Weekly Standard when there was still a Weekly Standard, we would, just some of the dumb stuff that the three of us were laughing at a couple of times that we hung out. Andrew had this whole thing about how we were all husky male models, and we would like pose, just dumb things like that, products that he'd want to share, and it was very silly. I mean, it's not that he didn't take the world seriously, but he was able to laugh at it. And, one of the most vibrant and like people full of life, the most joyful people I've ever met. The last few times I saw him, I didn't even know he had not been well the year before, and he had some health scares. So it was definitely a shock. I got a call from Larry O'Connor, who obviously knew Andrew very well, and he does radio in LA and DC now. And he before I'd even had time to process it, he called me to tell me that it was true, because obviously him in particular, you read something online, you're like, and you also didn't want it to be true. So So I mean, I knew him really well for probably about 8 years, and it's something that I always you always wonder. There's a couple people I always wonder about how they would have felt about subsequent elections. One is Tim Russert, who passed away before 2008. Yeah. And then Andrew passed away in early 2012. And there's a lot of people that purport to know what Andrew would have thought about Trump and all that. And I don't think any of them are right. Might have loved him, might have been indifferent, might have hated him. Who knows? He would have lived a few more years. He would have been 4 years older when he ran, and he would have had 4 more years of experiences. I think there are things about Trump that he would have loved, like the way that he handles the press. And that's sort of the things that Dennis Miller likes the most about him. But I think that I love when people talk about Andrew. I love when they remember him. What I hate is when they sit there, and I've heard the case made for both sides of the argument. He would have hated this. He would have loved this. And it's like, well, you just don't know. Yeah. So I don't like when people do that, but I love when people who even like vehemently disagreed with him talk about how much they missed him. I mean, he had a great story about, he was on Bill Maher's show with Seth MacFarlane, the guy who created Family Guy, and obviously politically they don't agree on anything. But Seth, had Andrew call his son, and in his cell phone he did like all the Family Guy voices to Andrew's son. So it's like, it was really hard to not like him when you were in the same room as him. Definitely easy to disagree with him, sure, but he, one of the most likable people that I've ever met, certainly in show business and definitely in politics.
Yeah, which is certainly, you can't say that about everyone in the political field, especially, some of the people who subsequently took over, Andrew's company. That's we can get into a whole rabbit hole on that.
I mean, look, if you look at Breitbart.com, there are people who used to be very strongly associated with it that have not been there for quite a while. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the most disappointing thing. The one thing that I'm glad about the site's success is that, that it's become this huge website, is that, the money for that goes directly to Andrew's widow and their 4 kids. So, I would never want to see that site not be successful, because that directly impacts them. And I love his wife, Susie. Her father, Orson Bean, just passed away, and it was right as all this stuff was starting to happen. There was supposed to be a memorial that first weekend. I think it was the 13th of March, and then we weren't able to have it. So, I try to very lightly keep in touch with her and just say hi once in a while. But I think that that's what it's too bad that the word Breitbart kind of has the connotation it has now, and but I do think that he's still somebody that looms very largely, whether it's people who liked him or disagreed with him.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of why, I mean, I've always said that in terms of like my political style, I always have kind of identified with Andrew probably closest. I mean, Rush Limbaugh is obviously probably, my second biggest influence actually, but I've always said that I'm more of a Breitbartarian if I could kind of coin that term, because I do think that the political arena nowadays is polarized, and there aren't very many people like Breitbart who you can just kind of have like a discussion, and also I do think that the whole notion of politics being downstream from pop culture, that's another thing that he was very strong on, that I think is one of the good things that kind of came out of the Trump presidency, if anything. But, so kind of moving on, so you mentioned that you met Dennis on the CNBC show, and then you did the radio show for 8 years, so I wanted to ask you, just kind of in general, are there any particular guests or moments of the show that really stood out to you in particular?
Well, sure. I mean, we just referenced two of the best guests we could have,
sure,
which was Andrew Breitbart and Orson Bean, his father-in-law. Just the stories that Orson would tell about old Hollywood. And if people don't know who he is, they should Google him. I mean, at one point he was a super lefty, to the extent that he was actually blacklisted because he went to a Communist Party meeting to try and impress a girl. He didn't work for a while, except for on Broadway. And then, just sort of, he found religion. He became very conservative. He sort of opened Andrew's way of thinking, basically. I mean, I would say listening to Rush Limbaugh and having Orson as a father-in-law really had a lot of impact. So those were great. But there were like just showbiz moments that were fantastic. Probably one of my favorite shows we did was a rare time where Dennis was in studio. And there's video footage of this that I think somebody posted on YouTube. I remember we ran cameras that day. So in studio, it was Dennis, myself, Norm Macdonald, and Jason Sudeikis, who was on SNL at the time.
Oh, yeah, I think I've seen that.
Yeah, and that was just like, why am I even in this room, much less with a microphone where I can talk into? I think I spoke twice during that. It was just to sit there and watch it was amazing. But, I mean, Norm Macdonald was always one of my favorite guests. And, Norm's just a fascinating, weird character. So we used to have him on every week when, pretty early in the show. And I always look forward to that. It was always great to have him on. I mean, look, there's other, like, there's been of, being the producer of the show, you're connecting the call or answering it. So I made small talk with Tom Hanks while we were waiting to have him on. And we were doing two segments. He was in Italy filming one of those Dan Brown movies, the second one, Angels and Demons, I think. And I was just going to put him back on hold, but he just made small talk because he's Tom Hanks. He's like America's dad. He's like the most delightful guy in the world. I spoke with George W. Bush before we connected with him for that interview. So I have a lot of these like personal memories that weren't even on the air because I got to talk to these people, and that was always really fun. And it was like sort of very surreal. Definitely got to meet all sorts of people, but to point at high points, Andrew, Orson, Norm Macdonald. And look, that's where I started doing the Bladtcast. My podcast was for the website of the Dennis Miller Show. I started just thinking, I'm like, well, if I talk about the show and I talk to the guys that I do the show with, I think that could actually be fun. Maybe people would want to hear it. It very quickly kind of got away from that, but that was the thinking of putting it there and doing it. And then by doing it, I felt comfortable enough to guest host for Dennis. There was a day that he was sick. We couldn't have Larry O'Connor, who was our regular. I asked another one of our regulars. They were out of town. And I was like, I'll just try and do it. And I even told my boss, I'm like, look, I'll do it for an hour. If it doesn't go well, or if I feel like it's not going well, we'll just run a best of the other 2 hours. But it was fun. And I don't know, I did it. I might have even done it 10 times. I did it a lot. And
Yeah.
that was fun to host a national radio show. And there was a program director in Reno who hated me so much that he wouldn't air those shows. And I forget the direct quote that he had, but it used to be in my Twitter byline, was that something about how I'm very vanilla, you know? And I don't know. I took that as a badge of courage, that somebody disliked me so much that he actually wouldn't air the show the days that I hosted. So, you know, and then sometimes when I was hosting, it was last minute. So I'm like, well, he must have gotten stuck airing the show a couple of times. And here's the good thing about this situation is I don't remember the guy's name. I would say it too, because I dislike this person so much.
Yeah. Well,
so I'm glad I've forgotten what their name was.
Yeah. Well, I would encourage you, you know, to say that too, so that, you know, people can go troll him or whatever. But
yeah, well, I could probably find it in an old email, but it's good that I don't remember his name. I definitely remember the market, though. I'm like, where do you get off? You know, pretend Vegas.
Yeah, well, it's not like there are that many, you know, kind of conservative libertarian types out there in Vegas, you know, either that would.
Yeah, right. So. I know, but that was fun. That you know, of course, I land on the one thing. I mean, I got to talk to some great people by doing that, just because of the way that these press tours work. It's like a specific day and time, and that was the proof that they didn't care who they took to the. So I got to talk to Steve Carell because he was promoting I think the second Despicable Me, and I got to talk. I mentioned him before. I got to talk to Seth MacFarlane because he was promoting the Western movie that he did. Did not perform well at the box office. If you've ever seen that, it's not like awful. It's not great, but there's some good jokes. It's just like, who's going to set out and make a comedy Western after Blazing Saddles? You know, it's almost like, it's like, it was done too well. You know, it'd be like if Sam, if you and I decided, let's make a comedy about the search for the Holy Grail. And it's like, wait a minute, that's like the Monty Python movie. Why would you make another one of those, you know? Yeah.
Well, you know, and the other thing that you guys have kind of become infamous for, too, is, you know, you guys have indirectly become, you know, part of the KISS lore to a certain extent.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I have the shirt on right now for those watching on YouTube. You know, just because we're in quarantine doesn't mean that you can't still report for duty in the KISS Army. Absolutely.
Exactly. Which, you know, kind of begs the question. You know, I know that they're in the middle of their second or third, you know, farewell tour. I keep losing track of how many farewell tours we're into now. But you know, I think
this is the second official farewell tour. However, this second official farewell tour is scheduled for 3 years. And look, they're not going to be able to go back on the road this fall. So it's probably going to get stretched out just a little bit longer. So, but the last big event that I went to in early March, Will, who I do the podcast with, Will Sterling, we saw KISS at Staples Center. And that was one of those things when everything started getting shut down. Everybody, I was at an event with 20,000 people, you know, and, you know, look, it's KISS fans. This is, you know, is hygiene always number one on their list? No. Number one is rock and roll all night. Number two is party every day. Somewhere in there's time to maybe take a shower. But it was this sort of like, you know, once we got to like a couple weeks after it, I texted Will. I'm like, all right, I think we're all right. But, you know, it was sort of this frightening specter at the middle of my life, was that I went to this huge event, and, you know, I have 2 small kids, and like, did I bring germs into the house? And, you know, but to be able to look back and like, hey, I was at a big event, and people are not going to go to anything like that for a while, you know? So I'm glad I saw KISS when I did, because who knows when I would be able to see them again, you know?
Yeah. Now, who has the bigger ego? Because I know that they've both been on the show, Gene or Paul.
Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley are both really delightful. Gene was very cool. I met him last summer, Dennis was doing a TV show where he was filling in for Larry King, and we recorded a podcast after. And he was very cool, like taking a picture with me. It's actually a very funny picture because, I leaned in, next to him, and he just turned to me and he said, "Don't grab my ass," and it was so funny. I think anybody who's worked with them will say that they probably both have big egos in either way. But I got to meet both of them because of Dennis, so I'm very excited. And they were both really nice to me. I think that, look, when you're accomplished in the way they are, you generate the kind of money they are. Sure, of course, it's going to be something where you just at some point realize, like, yeah, the impact that you had on a very specific genre of music and just the amount of money they've made. Gene has a really good sense of humor about him being Gene Simmons, and Paul, I think, Paul is very comfortable in his own skin now. But if you read his book, he spent a lot of time, just sort of very self-conscious. And, I think he's very happy now. I think they're both really happy now, and they can't believe that I think Gene is in his 70s, and I think Paul's almost 70, and they're still, putting on the kabuki makeup and, breathing fire and all that stuff. I mean, it's probably pretty crazy for both of them.
Yeah, well, I think Gene's kids have certainly kind of, ego checked him a bit too. But also, I mean, when you're part of one of the most legendary rock bands, in history, and you're married to Shannon Tweed, I mean, how do you not have a big ego? So
right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, look, it's there when Kiss was first out and they were putting out all the merchandise, everybody was like, "Oh, look at it!" But everybody does it now. Bands that are supposed to be, beneath this. I mean, or it's supposed to be beneath them. I mean, So yeah, they just sort of revolutionized the idea. I mean, the idea of like selling T-shirts at concerts, it wasn't what it was now. Like, So, and then they definitely took it to a level no one else has with the Gene's line about we have Kiss condoms and Kiss coffins. We get you coming and going. So it's great. I mean, he's got a huge sense of humor about the whole thing, and I think that when you sit him down and talk to him, he's fine to talk about it, but it doesn't define his life, the fact that he's this member of Kiss.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, he's definitely very entrepreneurial as well. You look at all the different ventures that he's in, it's like, holy cow, he does a lot more than just, Kiss, merchandising. So
we've got Moneybag Soda. I don't even remember all of his stuff. And he's like a representative for like a CBD company, and he's never been drunk or high in his life. But it's great. He's if we could all be the pitchman that Gene Simmons is, I think we'd all be well off.
Yeah, we'd all.
I mean, financially and also spiritually.
Yeah. Now, did you ever have Trump himself on the show? I can't remember if you...
No, he was on. I mean, obviously it was to promote maybe a book, but definitely to promote new seasons of The Apprentice, or Celebrity Apprentice is what it would have been at that point.
Yeah.
So he was on a couple of times, yeah. And I mean, Dennis knows him a little bit, and he was on the CNBC show. So I mean, I've seen him. Dennis knew him a little bit. I think I remember a time that they were going to have dinner, and it was just too hard to coordinate. This is maybe like 2012 or something. But yeah, we had Trump on. I at one point I kind of remembered, I think I made a post somewhere on social media of like all the Trump related people that we had on sort of early in the first term, because it was like we had Trump on, we had Don Jr. on, we had Steve Bannon on, we had Kellyanne Conway on, and Reince Priebus we used to have on all the time, and he was chairman of the GOP. And I put all these people together, and I couldn't believe that we'd had quite so many on, just who we'd put together. But but we definitely, the short answer to your question is, Trump was on a few times, but it was probably usually in relation to the Celebrity Apprentice.
Yeah, well, I mean, he was, before he even got into politics, that was, what he did for, decades was, reality TV.
Yeah.
Stuff. I mean, I referenced the other day to a friend. I still remember when he when he and Vince actually fought at the WWE thing back in like '07. That was
Oh yeah,
that was
I've seen that. Yeah,
that was an infamous
yeah,
moment. So
yeah. Do you follow wrestling, or did you like it when you were a kid, or?
I used to, and then things kind of changed. Kind of my line, like The Rock. Obviously, they moved on to other things later on. But yeah, I used to follow it a bit. So back in the day. So
yeah, I mean, when I obviously I'm older than you. When my brother, when I was a kid, my brother really liked like the Hulk Hogan, Roddy Piper, that era. So I would see a little of it. It was more that there was a cartoon, like a Hulk Hogan's Rockin' Wrestling. I remember the cartoon better than I remember actual wrestling, and then also obviously Hulk Hogan and Mr. T being in Rocky III was a kind of a defining moment for me.
Oh sure, yeah, that I think that's that still holds up well. I think Hogan's known for that more than he is some of the fights he's been in, for sure.
Well, and unfortunately recently he's known for things that he'd rather not be known for.
Yeah.
But, yes.
Yeah. So I know we're kind of jumping around. So in regards to the Bladtcast, you have, I mean, that show it's kind of become like the Law and Order of podcast, because there's you there, but then it seems like there's a kind of a revolving, cast on.
Yeah, I mean, the Bladtcast, it changed a little bit from when we started. Like when we first started it was myself, Will Sterling, who I mentioned before, this guy Ken, who Dennis nicknamed Coltrane, and a guy named David, whose nickname was Liev. Liev left first before the radio show ended, and he went on to doing mornings in country music radio, which he still does in the LA area. And then he was replaced by this guy Jeff, who Dennis nicknamed Captain EO, as though Jeff were spelled Geoff. That's the nature of that. So so that's how Jeff came in. And then we kept doing the podcast afterwards. It was we would kind of get together, every once in a while. We try to record two of them, and it was fun. It was a way to keep it. I've kept in better touch with those guys because of the podcast, and I like them both very much. I like Ken. I like Liev. I like those guys all, but it's sort of so like those are the main guys. And then when I started doing shows at AfterBuzz, that studio was like 5 minutes from my house, so that was fun. And one of my co-hosts there, her name is Zia Anderson. She's probably one of my favorite people that I've ever hosted things with. And she's just got the right sense of humor, and she's fun. So I've dragged her into sort of being like our fourth. She's like kind of like an alternate juror, if you overextend the Law and Order metaphor.
Yeah.
So she's on when she can be. I did do a Zoom conversation with her not that long ago, and I do Marvel movie news with her on Popcorn Talk. So I still see her digitally or remotely like this. But yeah, so she fit right in, and so she's kind of a regular. But I'll do a lot of interviews. Like I get asked to interview musicians and authors and things, so I'll do that. I'm always happy to do that. I just think that's fun, And that leads to some weird pairings. There's an episode that I posted last week that I spoke with an author. She's a delightful woman. Her name was Kimberla Lawson Roby, and she'd written a book. It was a spiritual book. And then in the audio version of the episode, I talked to the bassist for Megadeth. And you'd think like, well, those don't have anything in common. But you actually find pretty quickly in talking to both of them is like, oh yeah, one, they're both great conversationalists. I had a great conversation. So I kind of like getting those weird mixtures. But it's also like I'll talk to friends, people I've hosted with at AfterBuzz, just real life friends.
Yeah.
Like our current episode, I talked to my friend Brad, who lives in Melbourne, Australia. He's a middle school teacher there, and but we have a lot of the same likes in terms of pop culture and stuff. And I thought it would be interesting of like, okay, well, how is it different in terms of quarantine, lockdown, whatever you want to call it, in Australia, and at this point it's kind of very much the same, but sort of the start of it was a lot different. And then there's different what I didn't realize is there's different parts of Australia where schools are still open. It's I don't know. I guess the country is so much bigger than we think about. There's different approaches to different places. So, so I'll talk to all sorts of people, though. That's sort of again, this is the long answer to your question. The core guys are Will and Jeff. And I like to bring back Ken. I think we're going to have him on soon, and I hope to have Liev on soon. But it's really the three of us are the main ones, and then I'll bring in other people, as I see fit. And like I said, doing the show right now here in the bunker, it's like I just want to have a nice conversation with somebody. How are they doing? How are you handling this? What are you thinking about? Also, what are you watching? What are you reading? I mean, there's a lot of time for that for people that don't have two small kids like I do. So, it's that's what I like about the Bladtcast, to sort of wind down this long answer, is that I always say it's like, look, it's not for everybody, but I'm going to bet that there's one episode that is for everybody because it is so different. Like I'll do long form interviews about a variety of topics. I'll talk about comic books. I'll talk to people we just talked about Kiss before. I've done Kiss. Talked about music. I've talked about, movies. I've talked about a specific movie. I did a whole episode on the horrifying Alf Christmas Special last year at Christmas time. That's like literally the most depressing 45 minutes you could watch at Christmas time. I challenge everyone to watch the Alf Christmas Special and not be bummed out afterwards.
Yeah, it's not as like, I don't think that's as bad though as one time when I actually live tweeted with you guys to the Star Wars Holiday Special.
Oh yeah, that was rough. Yeah,
that was like some of the.
I mean, there's something you can get a level of enjoyment from the Star Wars Holiday Special. It's so bad. It's so many bad choices were made. But what I always say about that is like the commercials are super interesting because it's like the Egg McMuffin was new from McDonald's and they're introducing it. I'm like, well, that's exciting. Look at how brand new the Egg McMuffin was. What? McDonald's for breakfast? Who would ever do that? And there's toy commercials. And then there's, depending on the version of it you watch, there's a very famous news promo where the anchor is fighting the Frizzies. More at 11, and South Park parodied that guy in their Christmas special, their like second season. So it's like the Star Wars Christmas Special is such an important piece of pop culture. I completely understand why George Lucas wanted to bury it. There's a pretty cool Boba Fett cartoon, though. I'm not going to lie about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so bad, and it's like it's clearly what happens when you don't maintain the level of control over your intellectual property that. Honestly, Star Wars has done ever since. They learned that lesson early.
Yeah, although to be fair, I do think I actually know some people who after The Last Jedi came out, I have a couple friends who are like, well, I can't believe I'm saying this, but the Star Wars Christmas Special is actually better than this. So.
Well, I did that a little bit to troll people. After I saw The Rise of Skywalker, I ranked all the Star Wars movies, and so I put I forget, I put all the movies, whatever the order is, and anybody, you can take the original trilogy 4, 5, and 6 and put them in any order, but once you don't have them as 1, 2, and 3, I already disregard your list as being something serious. It's like, no, Revenge of the Sith is not better than Return of the Jedi. I don't care how many times people say it. It's like it's an original trilogy movie. Yeah. It's better than everything. But what I did is I ranked them, and I actually thought the Han Solo movie was fun. I enjoyed that. So I legitimately liked that more than Last Jedi, because I watched Last Jedi for only the second time, possibly the last time, the night before I saw Rise of Skywalker. And because I remembered that I was like, oh, I didn't love this movie. And then I'm like, oh, it's so much worse than I remembered. And, people are very defensive about that movie, including Will Sterling, who I do the podcast with, and Zach Wilson, that I do Marvel Movie News with. They love that movie. I'm like, great, I wish I could love that movie, but I don't. I find it to be incredibly bad and in so many ways. So anyway, what I did is I ranked everything. And so I had the Last Jedi was ranked last. Above that was Star Wars Christmas Special. Above that was the first Ewoks TV movie. and then the second Ewoks TV movie, and I think I might have even put one more thing in there to be obnoxious. Maybe no, I wouldn't have put there's these old NPR Star Wars radio dramas that are actually really well produced. I should have put those in there.
Oh yeah, I've heard some of those. Yeah, I mean, yeah, those.
Yeah, those were great. Yeah, I mean, Mark Hamill did voices in those, and I think John Lithgow was Yoda in the Empire Strikes Back one. There's just some like really recognizable names in that, and yeah, I mean, the radio dramas were actually a lot of fun. I would rank the radio dramas above all the prequels and all three of the J.J. Abrams, whatever you want to call the sequel trilogy.
Yeah, well, as someone who grew up with the Star Wars Expanded Universe, novels and comic books, which I think you've actually had a couple of the authors for those graphic novels, or at least the artists for.
Yeah, I talk very regularly to Dave Dorman, who painted the covers for the comic series was called Dark Empire.
Yeah.
And after every Star Wars movie comes out, I'll always have him on the podcast and we'll talk to him. I met him because he was a fan of Dennis. And I think we used to do the show in Chicago once a year. So he came a couple times, and I think we auctioned off like a painting he did for charity. He did like a painting of Optimus Prime or something like that. Anyway, so I've talked to him a few times. Dave's a great guy.
Yeah, no, I have both of those, comics behind me here in the bookcase somewhere, and it's just I heard one of your interview, and I'm like, well, I wish those were still canon at least, because they're they're better than the Rise of Skywalker. So
yeah, I mean, I think that those stories were great, and they, I read some of the novels that, the Timothy Zahn or the Empire novels, but I fell off pretty quickly just because the books were coming out so much, and I was still reading comics every week, so there was only so much time I had at that point, especially like once I got to college.
Yeah.
I definitely fallen off by then, but. Yeah, I mean, I think that the Heir to the Empire and Dark Empire stories were better tellings of that era. I think if, obviously it was a Disney decision. I think if the sequel trilogy wasn't as invested in having the old characters again, if you had just told a new story in that universe with new characters, I think it might have taken a little while. But I think it would have served them better, than just sort of like, but where's Lando, stuff like that. I had fun. I had a lot of fun with Rise of Skywalker. I was like, I don't know what people wanted from the end of this specific trilogy, but I thought that one was actually a lot of fun, especially because I had watched Last Jedi the night before, and it was not fun. It was the opposite of fun.
Yeah. Rise of Skywalker, I go back and forth on. I mean, I think that they did the best they could with what Last Jedi gave them to work with. I feel like had Last Jedi not been the train wreck that it was, they might have gone a different direction for Rise of Skywalker. But
yeah, I mean, J.J. Abrams wasn't supposed to direct Episode 9. This guy Colin Trevorrow was, and so I think had they ended up knowing that he was going to do Episode 9, they probably would have had him do Episode 8 as well, because you would have had some kind of consistency in the storytelling. You wouldn't have had to kind of undo things from Episode 8 and Episode 9. And, there were people who were very upset with it. I was just like, yeah, but the things that he undid were the things I liked the least, so I'm not going to have a problem with that, So I don't know. Look, it's tough. It's these fandoms are incredibly divisive, and when you go back in on people's youths, whether they grew up with the prequel trilogy, like Will Sterling, who I do the podcast with, he's in his early 30s. He saw the Phantom Menace. He think he saw it in theaters like 8 times, when he was a kid. I mean, it's and that's not the worst one, by the way. Don't let anybody tell you that the Phantom Menace is the worst of those movies.
No,
at least it has Darth Maul in it. I still say it's the middle one, because the scenes with Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman. Natalie Portman is a phenomenal actress. She's so, but he made her so bad in that movie. Like Hayden Christensen's badness made Natalie Portman seem terrible. And I was just like, that's the dark side at work right there, to make a talented actress look so bad.
Yeah, well, that, and also, I mean, he made the character of Anakin so creepy and stalkerish. I'm like, okay, I'm not sure that Darth Vader is supposed to be a stalker. I don't think that's really the point of.
Yeah, how did you turn Anakin Skywalker into Keith Olbermann?
Yeah, yeah. So.
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah. So anyway, it's that's what I was gonna say is when you go back into these fandoms and you change anything, it's it's the same thing with Star Trek. I find Star Trek Discovery to be one of the best shows on television in, I don't know, at least the last 5 years, maybe the last 10. But because it took a different approach to Star Trek, people were very upset with it. And they even kind of caved into some fan service and undid some things at the end of the second season. And then, Doctor Who, I mean, they have a female doctor now. And it's like the problem with that show isn't her. It's these terrible stories that they have her running around in, so people are like, oh, they need to bring back a man doctor. And I'm like, sure, they probably could one day. She's not bad. They just give her bad stories. And I think that's what it comes down to a lot of times, for any of these things, I mean, the one that I never got was Battlestar Galactica, because the reboot was really good and dark and gritty. The original I loved as a kid, but it was so silly. It was like a ripoff of Star Wars at every turn, basically, and like they turned it into its own thing. And I'm like, oh, this is so much better than the original, and it's like, oh, but Starbucks is a woman now. I'm like, well, so what? It's like, they turned it into something. It was like an allegory for 9/11. I mean, they really did something interesting with it. And that, to me, that's why it was great. It's because you took something and you didn't just try to make it different. You actually succeeded in taking that framework and putting it towards something else. So I don't know. But anytime you change anything that people love, it's like, no, I just want it to be exactly the same as it ever was,
Well, what did you think of the Mandalorian? I'm curious. I haven't had a chance to listen to those episodes of the Bladtcast.
Yeah, I love the Mandalorian. Did you see it?
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought it was great. I felt like when it was over, I was jealous of anybody who was going to binge it and be able to just watch it in like a weekend or maybe even one sitting, because I did an after show for AfterBuzz for it. So I would watch it. I would watch it like first thing in the morning, and then we would do the show in the late morning. And it was so hard to wait for those weeks because of the cliffhangers that they had. I thought it was great. It was, I think it was smart because it wasn't a show about Boba Fett. It was like in the universe, but it didn't give us any of our characters. And that's kind of what I think you needed. And I found him to be really interesting and engaging. And obviously, I know his name is the Child, but we all call him Baby Yoda because he's a baby Yoda. Nobody actually thinks that's Yoda as a baby, but it is a baby version of Yoda. And it was so well done, like at every turn. Like the effects were, cinematic quality. I thought that the stories were great. I thought it was a really engaging story all the way around. You had some great acting, some great guest stars, Ming-Na Wen, Bill Burr of all people was on it, So I don't know. I really loved it. I know there are people who thought that it was a little slow. And anybody who found the pacing of The Mandalorian slow, I challenge you to watch Star Trek Picard, because Star Trek Picard, I love seeing Patrick Stewart as anything. Charles Xavier, as in Jean-Luc Picard, great. But the first 4 episodes, you're like, yeah, this could have been 2, But I didn't feel that at all with The Mandalorian. Anyway, that's my thoughts on The Mandalorian. What did you think of The Mandalorian?
Yeah, no, I like The Mandalorian as well. I'm also a big fan of Pedro Pascal and General too. Ever since Narcos, that was another series I loved, and I always make the joke that it was cool to see Juan Carlo Esposito, Gus Fring from Breaking Bad as an
yeah, I know Gus Fring was in that. Yeah,
as an Imperial. It's too bad that we couldn't get Grand Moff Escobar or
hey, maybe season 2.
or anything
Yeah.
like that, bring the whole thing full circle. But no,
Yeah.
I definitely think that, as someone who, is also a bit jaded by by the sequel trilogy and what we got, I feel like this is the Star Wars that, people actually, want, where they focus a lot more on, actually like developing new characters and not just trying to, shoehorn in the Skywalker legacy all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it came at the perfect time because there was this very divisive moment of you had your, well, I was going to say there's two camps, but I guess there's three. You have your Last Jedi people, you have your Rise of Skywalker people, and then you have your people who hate all of them. But not everybody, almost everybody agreed on Mandalorian. For the most part, everyone liked it. And that was like, yeah, that's what Star Wars is supposed to be. It's supposed to be so great that we can't help but love it,
Yeah, and even if like every aspect isn't perfect, that there are certainly aspects to it that everyone likes. Like, yeah, the dialogue might be a little, this wasn't one of my criticisms, but like someone I know thinks that like the dialogue was, wasn't that great in The Mandalorian. Well, the dialogue isn't that great in even the original, movies either.
No,
So,
I mean the original Star Wars in particular had some really bad dialogue. I mean, Carrie Fisher was very vocal about some of the lines that they had to read that George insisted on, and yeah, I mean, look, and you can't criticize performances in any Star Wars property without going back to Mark Hamill in the first one. Uncle Owen, this one has a bad motivator. It's like, shut up, kid. He's so bad in it. In all honesty, there's moments where he's great, but there are times where you're just like, this is the kid who passed the audition? Like, really? This guy?
But I wanted to go to Tachi Station to pick up some power converter.
Yeah, exactly. You're just like, shut up.
So,
Give me the keys to your land speeder. You're not going anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, really, this one is the chosen one to save the.
Yeah, right. I know he's gonna save all of us. Kid.
we're screwed. So.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, no, I think The Mandalorian is pretty good. Like I think I think basically what they've done, I think it's maybe a little played out, but I feel like they turned The Mandalorian into basically John Wick in space a lot of the time too.
Yeah, there's definitely moments where you're like, oh yeah, well he sure got out of that somehow. Yeah, exactly. I mean that's yeah. I think there's definitely an element of that, but it was always cool to see him do it.
Yeah.
I mean, for me anyway.
Yeah, and someone else pointed out, it's like, geez, he sure uses that flamethrower, a lot. That thing never runs out of gas, it seems.
But then they did have it run out in the final episode.
Oh yeah,
By the way, if I had a flamethrower, I'd use it all the time. I'd be roasting marshmallows. I'd make toast that way. I mean, I would come up with very practical applications for my flamethrower.
Yeah. And now with this quarantine, because I know that they were shooting season 2 almost immediately after they started, after they wrapped season 1, they basically started filming season 2. And now I'm curious, this is the big question, like we mentioned earlier, with, kind of quarantine and everything, everything's getting delayed. I mean, even James Bond, which was supposed to come out this month, got delayed.
Yeah, it would have come out, I think, last weekend. And yeah, I mean, look, that movie was done. That's easy. Black Widow was supposed to come out May 1st. You have some of these big tentpole movies. And, the first movie that changed its schedule was Fast and Furious, was like, yeah, we're just going to come out next year. I'm like, what? But as time's gone on, you're like, oh, they were probably the smart ones to just go to next year. Because, look, Wonder Woman 84 moved from June to August. I'm like, are movie theaters going to be open in August? Maybe. And how many people are going to then want to go into those movie theaters, So it's a valid question. My understanding is that they finished the photography on Mandalorian, but they obviously have a lot of effects work to do. And I think that those properties, they don't let you work remotely from home. So I think that they might have had to stop on that stuff. Like there's a Marvel movie that was supposed to come out in November called The Eternals. That I think is done, but they're not going to get their effects work done in time. So right now it's scheduled to come out in February. So I think that there's a lot of things, but there's other shows. There's other Disney Plus shows. There's Disney Plus shows that are Marvel Universe shows. Falcon and Winter Soldier, Loki, and this show WandaVision about Scarlet Witch. That those were all in different levels of production, and they all stopped very abruptly. So we were supposed to get Falcon and Winter Soldier in August, and if we do, it won't be a complete season, I think. I think any of these shows that, say Mandalorian, that there were supposed to be 8 again, and they're like, well, we have 4 of them done. Great. Put 4 out whenever it was supposed to come out, and then you'll do like season 2.5 when you're able to finish it, because it's like people aren't going anywhere. And look, even when you can start going places, I think a lot more people are going to be more comfortable of like, instead of going to the movies, let's watch this thing on Disney Plus or whatever. So I hope that people are keeping that in mind of giving us at least partial content when it comes to TV, TV series and things like that.
Yeah, well, and then in the meantime, it's interesting that you've brought up Disney Plus because, I mean, as someone who grew up with the original Amazing Spider-Man show from the 90s, like, having that whole library has been, very interesting to kind of...
It's great, having that in the X-Men animated series, which I'm a huge proponent of the X-Men animated series because they were really respectful of the source material. I'm going to repurpose this interview for the Bladtcast soon, but for AfterBuzz, I did a special of a show that I used to do every week called Marvel TV Weekly. I spoke with the creator and his wife, who was also a writer on the animated series because they wrote a book. His name's Eric Lewald and his wife Julia. We had a great conversation about that show, and that's one of the things I love about Disney Plus is the renewed excitement for the X-Men animated series, which was like something that my little sister and I watched together. That was sort of like the first like nerd thing that we could bond over. And that sort of bridges the gap between me, doing some of the shows that I do at AfterBuzz. I'm in my mid 40s. I'm talking to people in their late 20s, early 30s, but we all loved X-Men the animated series,
Yeah.
So it's great. And look, that Spider-Man show is also great, but the X-Men characters are so near and dear to me. I love Spider-Man as well, but just that show was done so well, and I was so happy with the way it was done. I do love that you're of an age where you called that the original Spider-Man series, which, of course, I had a series when I was a kid called Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, which is also on there. It's not it's for kids for sure, but I've shown that to my kids because, shows that were for like 10-year-olds in 1983 are pretty good for 4-year-olds in 2020,
Yeah.
So I think that the 90s Spider-Man might be a little too scary for him. So it's a little bit of a more childlike sensibility. So I love watching those shows with my son because there's episodes with there's a great one. If you're going to watch any episode of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, watch one called 7 Little Superheroes because Doctor Strange is in it. Captain America's in it. Let's see who else is in it. I forget now. Prince Namor, the Submariner, the Chameleon. So that one's good. There's one, I think there's 2 with the X-Men in it. So there's stuff to be found in all this stuff. But the having those 90s shows is great. And then there's more recent shows that I haven't even seen. The one thing I was disappointed about that's not on Disney Plus, because I guess Sony owned it outright and it was a partnership with Viacom. There was an MTV animated Spider-Man where Neil Patrick Harris was the voice of Peter. It was right after the first Sam Raimi movie, I think, so they wanted it to be a little bit more, not adult, but for like older kids, maybe for teenagers. And that show you can't get on Disney Plus, which is a little disappointing because I think most people, one, don't remember it. And you can find it. You can buy the whole series on Amazon, but it's like, I don't know. I don't even know how much it is. It's like $25 if you want to buy it. So it's like, well, I'd sure like to have it for something I'm already paying for. But I mean, look, the shift in the level of quality on animated series in the 90s was very apparent to me. Because I grew up in the 80s when everything was for kids and little kids, and you had to keep the little kids in mind. And, the movies that we had, I mean, there's a Roger Corman Fantastic Four movie that I think he made for $1 million. It didn't actually come out, so you have to. I bought like a bootleg video cassette of it at a comic book convention. The same day, I bought my copy of the Star Wars Christmas Special, so I was very excited. I bought these 2 VHS cassettes that are somewhere in this room, and but there's a 1990 Captain America that is so bad. This guy Matt Singer plays Captain America. There's a TV movie of Doctor Strange from the 70s. There's a Spider-Man TV series live action from the 70s where his webs are literally like ropes that come out of it. To finally get good stuff, which really was like the first X-Men movie, the first Sam Raimi movie. The sequels of both of those are still 2 of my favorite superhero movies. X2 and Spider-Man 2 with Alfred Molina as Dr. Ock. Those are 2 of my favorite superhero movies. I think those are so well done. And it just sort of is like, and look, you don't get that without the Tim Burton Batman. You do the Tim Burton Batman, people are like, oh, wait, we can make these movies good? Okay.
Yeah.
Because, like, I have a soft spot in my heart for the Richard Donner Superman. It's a little hokey. And the second one is okay. But, man, the 2 sequels are so bad that it was like, it really, Superman 3 and Superman 4 really set back superhero movies for probably not 10 years, but at least 5. It was like you were on a good trajectory, and it's like, nope, superhero movies equal garbage.
Well, yeah, well. So the Tim Burton, it's interesting that you bring up the Tim Burton Batman movies because I mean, those are 2 of my favorite. Batman and the Batman '89, and then Batman Returns, and then you get Batman and Robin, which is just kind of like...
Don't forget, before that, you get Batman Forever, which Batman Forever, also directed by Joel Schumacher. It's not great. It's not as bad as Batman and Robin. And my hot take on Batman movies is Val Kilmer is still my favorite Bruce Wayne out of all the Bruce Waynes, and that includes Christian Bale, because he played him right. I think Michael Keaton, him as Batman was great. Something about Michael Keaton as Bruce Wayne I never quite bought. And then Christian Bale didn't have the spoiled millionaire aspect of it, or billionaire, excuse me. So Val Kilmer's actually my favorite Bruce Wayne, not my favorite Batman. But I think that was good. But once you bring Robin in, and then that next one has Batgirl too, that's when you're going into the territory you shouldn't be,
Yeah. I mean, the writing on that was it was so bad that that kind of, you want to talk about superhero movie setbacks. That one really set back, superhero.
Well, he's talked about this on the air, but did you know that Dennis did a punch up, a rewrite on Batman and Robin? They didn't use any of the stuff he wrote, but he actually wrote a version of it.
I actually, on one of the YouTube channels I subscribe to, and I was actually going to text you about this or message you, but on one of the YouTube channels I follow, someone actually somehow got a hold of that, write up somehow that Dennis did, and
that's interesting. I'd like to see if it's really that script. I've read the Kevin Smith Superman Return script that he did, which basically takes the death of Superman and the return of Superman and turns it into a movie.
Yeah.
I didn't believe that was really out there, and then I did see it. So yeah, I mean, look, Dennis turned in that script to somebody, so I'm sure it exists somewhere at Warner Brothers. So it's not impossible that somebody gets it. But he's told me a couple of jokes that he put in it. So if those jokes aren't in that script, then I feel like it's probably not really his. But I'd be fascinated to read that, to read Dennis's take on a Batman movie. I don't know. I think that would be interesting.
Yeah. Well, I feel like his jokes would be a lot, would be a lot better than some of the ones we got in Batman and Robin for sure.
Yeah, well, one of them he said on the air what it was. It's what's her name, Barbara, who's Batgirl. So Alicia Silverstone. So superhero movies have a lot of these sequences where you put on your suit and you get on all the gear, and it's like a very big dramatic moment. I just earlier this week I live tweeted the director's cut of Daredevil, the Ben Affleck Daredevil, and it's a bit of a mess, but there's some good stuff in it. And it has one of those moments, and we're like, oh yeah, every superhero movie used to have this, where they're getting the suit on and everything. And so Batgirl gets the suit on, and then she does sort of it's a very funny moment where she takes a step back and she has to like look at her closet and then think about what she wants to wear, sort of like that I'm dressed, but it's like, oh, what purse goes with that? Sort of like that very like legitimate moment. And it's like, it's a funny moment. It's not in the movie. And Dennis explains it better than I do, but I was like, oh, that's great. I love that. I love that he, brought that kind of sense of humor to it. So yeah, if we could all read Dennis Miller's Batman and Robin, I think it would, at the very least, it would be an entertaining read.
In regards to Dennis and his sense of humor, because people actually always ask me about this, because I actually get a lot of Dennis's arcane references and in humor. How much of that is a bit that Dennis does, and then how much of that is kind of like?
I mean, he knows everything that he's referencing. I'm in a position where I know. Look, on a good day, I'll know half of it, and then some of it I can fake because of the context he uses it in, and then there's times I'm just like, I have no idea what that is, and
yeah,
look, Google is my friend, because a lot of times he says something, I look it up, I'm like, okay, now I know what that is in case there's a follow-up. But there's a lot of like really deep stuff, and that's what I think always appealed to me just as a fan. I mean, when I first started watching Saturday Night Live regularly, Dennis did Weekend Update on there, and it very quickly became my favorite part of the show, just because I'm like, this guy doesn't. I don't know if we're allowed to swear or not, but
yeah, you can fucking swear.
Yeah, this guy, the phrase that we use now, this guy doesn't give any fucks, and he's just there. He's telling jokes, and he's killing with these monster jokes. And you find out later he wrote almost all of them with this guy Herb Sargent, who had been a producer on SNL forever, And it's so he was so good. And his first comedy album, I actually have it on cassette somewhere in here, called the Off-White album. It's so funny. There's bits in there that I still try to get him to say once in a while, just because it makes me so happy. So what I liked about him was I loved the references and the sub references, and just how deep it was. It was why I sort of in the same time I loved the series that at that point was on Comedy Central, Mystery Science Theater 3000, just because there were so many jokes packed into them making fun of these bad movies that some of them you're just like, I think that joke was just for me. It was so obscure, So I love that level of stuff. I love when Dennis does that, and it's funnier to me when it's like so out there. I have no idea what it is. When I can't even figure out how to Google what it is, like that's a good reference.
Yeah, that's what I always tell people if I turn them on to Dennis's humor. I'm like, look, don't feel bad if you have to pull up Google. I almost have sometimes wondered if, when talking to, if people are like, hang on, Dennis, I've got to pull up Google to see what you're.
There are people that they interview. Like I'm trying to remember. There's somebody recently. It might have been Frank Caliendo, who's great impression. It's very funny guy. Yeah, and by the way, to give a plug, Dennis is on Frank Caliendo's podcast. I think that's going up today when we're talking Sunday, April 19th. At the very least, it'll be up by tomorrow. I haven't even heard it yet. Dennis called me afterwards and said, "Oh, I think you should check it out," because he never does that after an appearance. He was so excited for me to see it because he thought that it was so fun and so funny. So, but anyway, yeah, Frank Caliendo, when he was on about a month ago, there were a couple of moments where he's like, hang on, I got to write these down so I can look them up. So you get that a lot. And yeah, look, I mean, it's like, it's Dennis will say that's his monkey trick, and it's kept food on the table for, I don't know, 35, 40 years, whatever he says. So, yeah. And I think, it's one of those things that's not for everybody, but there's going to be references that speak to people, on there, of most age groups. And, look, I think that's the thing that's, most unfortunate. There's a lot of reasons that the political divide in this country are unfortunate. One is the fact that people will say things like Dennis Miller used to be funny, but it's like, well, if you just pay even a little bit of attention, he's still incredibly funny. Nobody can synthesize a joke in the way he does. We used to do the CNBC show, and the writers would turn in all the jokes, and he'd look at it on the teleprompter, and he's like, no, that's not right. And he's like, he'd think about it. He'd say it a couple different ways out loud. He changed, and then when he read it again, you're like, that one word actually made it so much funnier. And his mind has probably always worked that way. He still does that. And I think that, it's such a funny, fertile comedy mind that it's like, yeah, there's certainly, I don't know. Look, if you can't laugh at a joke that you disagree behind the ideology of, then being in or around comedy probably isn't for you. I mean, I think you have some great people. Look, Chappelle's done very well with that recently. Bill Burr, Jim Norton, I think is great too. Like these are all guys who are great, and they say things that I'm like, I don't even know if I agree with that, but it was so funny, I don't care.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Well, probably one of my favorite stand-up, comedians. Although probably I shouldn't publicly admit to this, but people already know is Louis C.K.
Look. Louis C.K. was so funny. I saw him do 90 minutes once, and I was just like, you're used to, like, comedians usually do about an hour, and I'm like, I don't know how he packed it all in. And yeah, look, you can say that I think Louis C.K. is funny, and that doesn't mean you're saying, oh, I support the way that he masturbated in front of women. No, you don't have to say that.
Yeah.
It's like you like, yeah, I think Chinatown's a good movie, but no, I don't support Roman Polanski, raping that little girl, So it's and so I know that there's a new Louis special, and I actually really want to see it. I just haven't had the time because I'm very intrigued by, like, I don't doubt that he's still funny. I just kind of I haven't seen him in so long. I'm very interested in seeing it. Have you seen it, Sam?
I actually did a review for it on my channel last week. I didn't do any spoilers, although I'm probably going to now that it's been out for a while. But I mean, he is still on top of it as far as I am concerned. And I mean, the other thing is he's very self-effacing about it too. I mean, he basically starts off, with like, so how have your last 2 years,
that's good,
Ben?
Yeah.
So and he basically, I mean, he apologizes for it, but doesn't really apologize for a sense of humor. I guess that that's the best way. That's the best.
Yeah,
way
look,
I'll put it.
I like Louis. I want to see the special. I do think that somebody who doesn't like him, and I don't remember who it was, did have a really funny comment on it. It's like, oh great, just like Louis C.K. to drop a new special on us when none of us can run away. So I'm like, you know what? That's funny too. It's like, so, it's like a funny joke is a funny joke, and it was, it's something that I learned from Dennis, but it's something my brother pointed out to me a long time ago. It's like, look, if you can't laugh at something you like, look, we were making fun of the band Kiss before. I love the band Kiss, mostly because I liked them when I was a kid, but there's so much ridiculousness associated with that band. The fact that there is a Kiss coffin, well, that's fine. It's all very funny. And, and I think people take politics way too seriously. And look, there's a level of it that it is very serious. It's very important, especially, when it gets to be a presidential election year. Sure, I understand that there's people who feel very strongly one way or the other, but that doesn't mean that there isn't anything funny about it. It's like, if you don't like Trump, you could probably still laugh at a couple things about him, though. And look, if you don't like Joe Biden, it's still very easy to laugh at him. I mean, it just he kind of writes his own jokes. But for me, I think that they're both very funny, ridiculous cartoon characters, in their own ways. And there's a lot of things that are funny about both of them. And, just sort of like it's hard to handle talking to people who are just like, oh, we shouldn't joke about that. It's like, no, you can joke about anything if you do it right. It's like, there are jokes that you're like, a really funny joke, you're laughing, and while you're thinking, you're like, man, that is just wrong,
Yeah.
And it's like, it doesn't mean that you think that this bad behavior is really bad in real life. I mean, that it is good in real life. You're not supporting it, I mean, Ricky Gervais has a bit from one of his specials, about, it's not even really about kiddie porn. It just sort of like it headed into there, and it's like, I'm laughing at it not because I think that that's a good thing, it's funny that that's the turn it took, and it's like, it's fine, it's like, he's just on a stage telling jokes. That's what everybody's doing, and I mean, I think that the problem gets to be when people aren't comedians as much as they feel like they're there to preach. I think that, in her heyday, Janine Garofalo was very funny. I don't think she tells jokes anymore. She might, but I don't know that she does. I don't even know what she does anymore. You have people like that, like Sarah Silverman, one of the funniest, dirtiest comics ever. I think she's still funny, but I don't know where to find her being funny because, I know she did a show for Hulu that I don't think I think it was more of a serious show. She had a sketch show that Brian Posehn and some other people were on that I thought was very funny, but that was like 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's like people who can still be funny, it's great. And I don't think we should care so much about what their ideology is. You know, it's like, are they telling funny jokes? Great. You know?
Yeah, well, and that's why I love Dave Chappelle. You know, and again, going back to Louis, and this is kind of like another reason why I've kind of dipped out of doing the show, you know, strictly political, because this podcast used to be more political, and now it's more like, you know, a political, you know, kind of comedy show. I stole a lot of cues from you and Dennis for this podcast when I kind of revamped it, but yeah, like one of the things that, you know, I've kind of gotten some heat on is I think Louis C.K. actually did a bit on abortion a few years ago that I thought was, you know, genius. And I'm pretty pro-life myself, but it's still a great bit that he does.
No, and look, and it's like I don't know. Look, I don't know. I'm not quite sure I know the bit, but I've heard bits about it. And in general, somebody isn't saying, you know what's really funny is abortion. No, but it can make you laugh because it's unexpected. You know, I mean, it's you know, it's a divisive hot button issue, sure, but it's also like, I don't know. It's like there's ways in which you can laugh about it, and where you're not really trying to make a political point. That, you know, look, a joke that is funny and makes your political point, sure, that's good too. But you don't necessarily need that, you know. And, you know, if I were to think about, you know, some of the specials and things that I've watched, you know, especially, yeah, somebody like Chappelle, somebody like Louis, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's wrong in there. But see, you're saying you're pro-life, but you can laugh at an abortion bit, because why not? You know, I mean, if it makes you laugh, it makes you laugh. And you don't have to then break down, but my actual feelings about the issue, or it's like, you don't need that.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, it's fine. You feel the way you want to, and Louis feels the way he wants to, you know, and I don't know. And I also think that, you know, people's opinions are able to change on any of this stuff, you know, so it's like, it's okay to laugh at something. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of the worst thing. I haven't been at an actual comedy show in a little while. The last one I was at was it might have been Dennis's special taping, which was like almost 2 years ago now in Knoxville, and I wasn't like in the audience much. But, you know, you do get a lot of like people looking around like, is it okay to laugh at this? You know, so I think that's kind of the worst part of where we're at culturally, not even politically, is just everybody's like, oh, I want to laugh at this, but should I? You know, and
yeah.
And then people who are like, I'm not going to laugh at that, but I'm going to applaud because I agree with the politics behind the joke that actually wasn't that funny, you know? So it's tough to navigate. And I completely respect any comedian that's like, yeah, they don't come to me for politics. David Spade's a perfect example. He's like, nobody's coming to me to hear what I think about politics. Sure, he's got a TV show. I'm sure he'll make a joke about a funny picture of Trump, a funny picture of Biden, but he's not there to talk about his politics at all. And honestly, I don't want David Spade talking about politics. You know, I want him talking about what he's comfortable talking about.
What do you think? Because I know that another friend of the show is Nick DiPaolo. I've become a huge fan of Nick in a few years. I mean, Nick is definitely more cutthroat in terms of, you know where he's coming from.
Yeah, no, and look, Nick had a special that he put up for free on YouTube, which I thought was an interesting choice. I thought it was really good. There's definitely stuff that I didn't agree with in there, but the jokes were funny, so I didn't care, you know. And I think Nick is very funny. He's definitely dug in. It's like, well, this is what I think. And I'm going to see, it's like, I'm going to tell the jokes that I believe in, regardless of where I am. You know, I mean, I think we haven't talked to him in a little while on the show, but I know he relocated to Georgia.
Yeah.
But, you know, he was telling jokes in front of New York audiences. And I mean, it's like, yeah, but I mean, these are the jokes. So it's like, you know, you don't think that's funny. It's fine. You know, he's very unapologetic. And he's so funny. I mean, Nick is so funny, and there's definitely a couple things that you're like, yikes, that was a bit too far, you know. You know, like he said something about Alyssa Milano where I'm like, okay, that's funny. You probably took it one step too far, but I'm not saying, you know, he should apologize for that joke. No, it's like, it's fine. I'm like, I wouldn't say that, but I'm also not Nick DiPaolo. You know, that's not my job to say something. Like that.
I also always tell people, I'm like, if you think Nick DiPaolo is bad, you need to go back and listen to the old Sam Kinison record.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. Sam's old albums are pretty amazing.
Which
yeah.
Which I love that story that Dennis always tells about Sam Kinison too, because I can actually, the way Dennis tells that story, I can actually visualize it completely.
Are you talking about Dennis? This is Seika. Is that the story you're talking about?
Yeah.
The adult film star.
Yeah.
Seika. Yeah. Emmanuel Lincock, one of the first adult films I've ever actually seen, and let's just say there's some interesting usage of a ping pong ball that I don't think I was emotionally ready for as a I don't know how old I was. I was probably in middle school, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know that was the thing. But anyway, Sam Kinison was great, and I think in his heyday, I probably didn't appreciate Andrew Dice Clay, because I think I took him at face value. You kind of didn't realize what it was that he was doing. It took within a few years, I kind of got it. Like, Andrew Dice Clay is so funny. His like first special, he does a bit around the campfire where he does all these impressions. It's not like all the nursery rhymes and stuff. And my wife and I saw him a couple years ago. He's still very funny, but he knows that people came to hear the nursery rhymes, so he does them at the end. And it's like he just sets them up and then the audience yells them. It's like, okay, so it's like the Stones playing Satisfaction or Kiss playing Rock and Roll All Night. It's like, if you go to see him, you kind of want these things. And, it's the social commentary that people were making in the 80s. It's in some levels it might seem dated, but a lot of it is like, oh yeah, like, first of all, you can't say that now, but people do still feel the same way about the different levels of bullshit that you kind of have to put up with. One, in day-to-day life, but two, just trying to tell jokes. How difficult it can be to actually say something that is funny. I mean, I do it all the time. I have jokes I'll say on the podcast. It's like, I have a great joke that I'm not going to tell you right now to Dennis. Every once in a while, I'll tell him one, and then he's like, it'd be like, yeah, you should probably cut that out just for you, so that I don't get the headache of having said it on the podcast.
Yeah, I even have to do that. I was in a mass communications course one semester, and we had to like do a thing on like favorite comedy albums or something, and one of my favorite comedy albums is Richard Pryor's album called Super Nigger, and I actually had to write the professor and be like, hey, can I actually say what the title of this is in my...
Yeah, or do I have to call it Super N dash dash dash? Do I have to call it Super N word? And look, if you were giving a presentation in front of a class, I would be like, yeah, just don't call it that. But it depends. What did the professor say?
He actually did say that because it's the actual name of the thing, that obviously I could use the title, and I actually made the disclaimer at the beginning. I'm like, hey, listen, I didn't call it this. This is what Richard Pryor, who's blacker than black, call it.
And look, I know that album. It's great. Day. I mean, it's sort of this idea of Superman and look, it's look, I get that conversationally that's not a word that people that look like you or I get to use, and I don't necessarily feel comfortable actually quoting bits from Chris Rock specials, but they're in there, and I'm able to laugh at them, and I don't feel like by me laughing at him using that word, that means that I'm clearly supporting centuries of setbacks and racism. I'm supporting slavery. Like, obviously, if you laugh at a black comedian that's using that word, it's very funny. And by the way, in the right situation, white comedians used to be able to sneak that word in once in a while and have it work for a conversation. I think Bill Maher found out the hard way that we don't get to say that anymore.
Yeah. Which, I mean, begs the question too: is political correctness kind of going too far in terms of, interceding in comedy too? Because look, I understand when it's words that are really hurtful, you have to at least be careful with them. I don't think anybody should be told, no, you can't say it. There's
there's terminology for homosexuals that we all used to throw around a little bit more casually. Eddie Murphy on his album, the first track is that word.
Oh,
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, you know, to people in that community, those are words that are really hurtful to them, and it's like, all right, well, I don't necessarily need to use it in a public forum. Will I ever maybe use a word like that one-on-one to try and make somebody laugh, but, you know, not with a microphone turned on? Yeah, probably. It'll probably come up once in a while, but you're very mindful of it. It's not the way that we used to throw around words before. I mean, look, the N-word is in the Bad News Bears, the original one, not the remake.
Yeah.
You know, when they list off all the people on the team, you know, it's a word that the little white kid says. It's a really funny line. But when they did the remake, they sure weren't going to put that in there, you know?
Well, I mean, my friends and I always, you know, call each other the F word all the time. You know, oh, you're being such a, you know, a flagger right now.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, look, I definitely, not even when we were kids. I mean, I feel like even when I was in college, people still threw that word around. Like, don't be that, you know? And it's like, look, it's a different world now for sure. You know, I mean, you have public service announcements that like, don't say that thing is so gay to mean it's bad, you know, but every once in a while you're going to see something. You're going to see Jim J. Bullock in the center square on a rerun of Hollywood Squares. And you'll be like, wow, that is so gay because he's so gay. You know, it's like there's a way to use things like that. You know, Scott Thompson from The Kids in the Hall, he has a character named Buddy Cole, and Buddy Cole throws that word around, and it's very funny, and he uses it. And there's a Kids in the Hall song called "Running Faggot," and it's so funny, but it's also from 30 years ago, and they'll perform it live, and they sort of like acknowledge the fact it's like, you know, it's like, some of you were laughing just because of the word or so, you know, it's I forget how, I haven't seen them in a little while, The Kids in the Hall. So it's, you know, there's a lot of, I don't know, it's a minefield to just talk. And I think that, you know, there's a short list of words that you're like, just be mindful of what the repercussions are if you say it.
Yeah.
You know? And I think that a word that comedians throw around a lot and gets thrown around conversationally is the word cunt. And women hate that word. Most women. My wife hates that word. And I'm like, yeah, but that's kind of why people use it, is because it's such a terrible word. And sometimes someone calling them a bitch, it's like, no, they're beyond that. She's not just being a bitch. And that's a word we're not supposed to use anymore either. We're not supposed to call people a bitch, but it's like, or then what are they? You know, it's like, by the way, a guy can be a bitch too. I think, oh my God, he's being such a bitch right now. You know, there's a heterosexual guy anybody can be a bitch, and anybody can be a cunt.
The funny thing of it is though about you know about cunt is like everyone I know who uses that word though, it's all I've rarely ever heard a guy say that, but I've heard more than once in the last few years actually women calling each other that word. It's funny. It's like, and even
I mean, yeah, I've certainly heard Sarah Silverman say that. You know, I mean, it's she might have been one of the first that I remember anyway. But you know what? I'm going to bet that Joan Rivers used it. I would be shocked if she didn't. You know what I mean? Like, not on television, but I mean, she was so funny and she was so dirty, you know, that I wouldn't be surprised if she used it. You know?
Yeah. You know, what do you want to bet she called, you know, Johnny Carson, you know, or you know, a few other names after that whole.
Well, to be fair, like he got mad because she was his permanent guest host, and then she went and hosted a show for Fox. She like did a competing show, so he never talked to her again. And it was weird because like Leno didn't have her on the Tonight Show, and then Jimmy Fallon had her on, and then thank God he had her on because she died like maybe 2 months later or something. It was shortly thereafter she, you know, went in for that surgery that killed her. But she hadn't been on the Tonight Show in, I don't know, more than 25 years, basically because Johnny was so mad about it. So yeah, I'm sure she used that term to you know, characterize him. And you know, she burned that bridge, and she did a show for Fox for like, I don't even think it was on for a year, her late night show. So I don't know. I mean, career wise, she did fine, but you know, she could have, theoretically, she could have ended up being the next host of The Tonight Show. You know, I mean, she used to guest host a lot. Gary Shandling used to guest host a lot before Leno, you know. So if she didn't do that, I mean, it probably would have been another 7-8 years. She would have taken over in the early 90s. But yeah, anyway, sorry. So I went down that rabbit hole. But yeah, I'm sure she's used that. I've probably heard her use that word like on Howard Stern on Satellite or something, if I think about it.
Yeah, I know I've definitely heard her use that on some of the Stern archives that I've heard. Yeah, it's it's real interesting too, because with podcasting and that whole medium, I've been doing this since '08, the podcast format, and it's always been very interesting because.
So wait, sorry, you've been doing a podcast since 2008?
Yes.
Wow, you're like one of the few people that I know that's been consistently doing it, because I didn't really start till early 2013. And have you done it consistently, or did you ever take like an extended break? Or
I've done extended breaks, on and off, but like I said, I've rebooted this show off and on, and changed the title. But yeah, I've been doing it since '08. 2013 was really kind of the first year that I got discovered because of the Ben Shapiro interview I was on, a couple younger kind of conservative podcast networks. And then, after 2016 happened, I kind of took a little bit of a break just because, the whole fallout from that was, pretty interesting. I actually, I used to kind of fall in line with the whole, I was never a never Trump guy. But I knew a lot of people who were never Trumpers, who turned out that way. So it was interesting because, I was kind of on the whole thing of, well, I'm going to do what Breitbart said, in his CPAC speech, which is, and again, I don't know that he would have supported, Trump, who knows. But, the one thing that he does say in his speech is, back in 2012 is, I will vote for whoever the candidate is, because if we don't, we lose. And the one choice, we have two choices. One is Occupy, and one is America. So.
Yeah, I mean, and then on the simpler level, the way that Dennis talked about it at the time, he's like, look, there's two things to vote for. There's Hillary and not Hillary. I'm going to check the box that means not Hillary.
Yeah.
And I think that you're going to see a lot of the reverse of that, which is, I'm going to vote. There's two names. There's Trump, and then there's not Trump. And then you can point out, look, you can point out all the things that are wrong with Joe Biden, and it's not even like, he smells women's hair. He's a little handsy. He's forgetful. My favorite thing about him is that his teeth almost fell out during a debate. That actually made me like him more. I love that he stopped his teeth from falling out. I'm like, that's the guy who's probably ready to get a call in the morning. But, but look, there's people. It doesn't actually matter whose name is next to that, because it's just like, and I don't begrudge anybody the way that they feel one way or the other. People, I know people who love Trump, and I think there are things about him that I like, that I think are very funny, and I think that there are things that he's done that's well. It's that he's done a good job on plenty of things, and I think, like, do you want to point to how he handled the pandemic in the first month? Like, you can, but what about what's happening right now? Let's definitely focus on that first. How do we get out of it? And if you want to worry about, who's in trouble for not listening to this or that, great. You can put people on that story, but let's not make that our primary focus. Let's figure out, like, well, do the states have enough tests? Because you hear that and you go like, okay, well, that's a problem at the federal level if they don't. And, I think that it's a fascinating time, which will be more enjoyable to look back on in 5 or 10 years when we're not living it, to just think about this time that there was this election, that there was this global pandemic in the middle of a presidential election, and however it plays out. I mean, look, it's are people going to feel more comfortable? It's like, well, Trump's kind of been there. Let's give him another shot to stick with it. Let's not change horses midstream. It'll depend on how healthy are we in November. Are we voting in person? Are states, primarily going to really lean on voting by mail, which I understand there's problems with that. from a safety standpoint, I can understand anybody who's like, yeah, I don't want to wait in a line with 1,000 people for 4 hours and then touch a dirty touch screen. I get all of it. I get all the arguments. I get the arguments pro-Trump. I get the arguments anti-Trump. I get the idea for voting in person, for not voting in person. And I don't know what's right, and I don't know how it's going to go. The way it ever happens, it will be fascinating to look at. And it's like nobody's had this happen in the middle of their presidency. I mean, FDR had World War II happen while he was president, but he's also, he's elected for 4 terms. You have wars break out. You have smaller wars break out. H.W. Bush had the Gulf War, but you'd never had anything like this. And this isn't the American pandemic. This is the global pandemic. So it's like we're having this everywhere. And, if you want to compare us to other countries, you can, but the populations are so different and they're concentrated in such different ways. I'm glad that South Korea has a handle on it. But it's a much smaller it's like I don't even know what the population is, but is it less than Texas? Maybe. It's hard to compare, and it's like let's just hope everybody's healthy soon. And I know that there's differing opinions on this too. I just know I live in a state where we're not really we've got almost another month right now as we talk, May 15th. We can still go out, we can take a walk, but I have to go pick up groceries a little later, but I pre-ordered them online because that's what makes my wife happier. And I'm like, it's fine. It's easier. I don't mind. So I'll let them bring my groceries to my car. That's fine. We order food delivered instead of going out to eat. Great. So, it'll be interesting to see how these next couple months, even if people are all back out to some capacity in the summer, I think it's going to change the way that everybody looks at everything. And I think if this election were held a year ago, it's a very clear cut Biden versus Trump. How do you feel? Like, how do you feel about Trump? How do you feel about what he's done? And, you cannot like Trump and also agree that the media him.
Yeah.
I don't like what he stands for, but man, he does not catch a break. And I'm somewhere closer to that camp. There's a lot of things I don't like about him. There are things that I'm able to appreciate, but even if I hated him outright, you can't pretend that the media isn't in the bag against him, and that I think it's like, well, that's not fair, but that's just the way it is,
Well,
and go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one thing that was, that really stuck out to me was I was reading an article like in the Atlantic like 2 weeks ago or something, and it basically said something like, this wouldn't have happened if Hillary Clinton were president. That was kind of the headline, and it's kind of like, okay, now you're really reaching.
And you're like, okay, would things have happened a little differently? Possibly, decisions get made earlier. But the thing that the Trump people always point to is one of the things that he did right was he closed off travel from China at the end of January. That's not something that you would imagine Hillary or Joe Biden would have done, because they were saying like, oh, that's so racist to close off travel from China. And you can then raise the question that the CBS reporter did. Well, that's great that you did that, but what did you do with that extra month that it bought you? So, it's everything is so much more nuanced than the way the media covers it. It's like, well, if you're starting from a place that Trump is bad, that's probably not going to give you an honest break in the story. But at the same time, President Trump's new favorite outlet is OANN, or just OAN. And they start from a place of Trump is great and can't do anything wrong. And I'm like, well, that's not right either.
Yeah.
Neither one of them are right. And I would love there to be some kind of media coverage that I felt good about the information I was getting. I mean, look, I live in LA, so I get the LA Times app. I read that, but that's not everything I read, because you're just like, well, they have a specific point of view. And, Breitbart has a specific point of view. I still think the Drudge Report is incredibly valuable because, yes, the headlines are heavily editorialized, but it is still an aggregate for news, and it goes to these other sources. So he's just collecting what other people are saying. And, yes, he writes his own headlines. And, Andrew used to handle the overnight shift on the Drudge Report. He and Matt created that together in the mid-'90s. And that's really how Andrew made his name. He created that, and oddly enough also created the Huffington Post, except that the Huffington Post that he tried to create, he wasn't able to because all the conservatives weren't allowed to contribute to it at the last minute by places like National Review and Weekly Standard. Anyway, so I think that it's so hard to get our news in any sense that is unbiased. And I don't care how anybody synthesizes the information they get, and they can react to it however they want. I just wish we were all getting more accurate information than we are. And there's no news source that I feel like, well, clearly this is the best one.
I would have to say, like, I have about 5 or 6 ones, I'm fairly, like a pro-Trump guy, now. I didn't vote for him in the primary, but when it came to the general, that was kind of when I, signed up and, like, got a MAG hat. Now, do I think everything that he does is, genius? No. I mean, I certainly think that there are certain moments during the day where I'll check his Twitter and I'll be like, okay, did you really need to tweet that,
Yeah, look, I mean, there's the absurd level where it's like, nobody cares what the ratings are like for your press conferences except you, So that's great that you're tweeting about that because it makes you feel good. But, like, let's talk about what happened in there. And then, look, I think what he did yesterday as we're recording this, or maybe it was Friday, I think that's very dangerous to say things like liberate Michigan. I think that other people saying it is fine, but I don't think the president should say that. And he can. He's a president. It's fine. And that's my opinion. You could feel the exact opposite. But I'm just like, I feel like that's giving credence to, people literally rising up. And look, people should feel comfortable not just falling in line for what their government says. And that includes the federal government, the state government, the county government, everything. But it's almost like the president signing off on it is like, all right, but you're only doing it in states with Democratic governors. Yeah. You're not doing it. And there's Republican governors that are telling people to stay home, and you didn't do it to them. So that's where it's just like, I just wish you didn't do it, because it's like that just makes trouble that you don't need. And, I don't know. I mean, look, you're in Florida, Sam, and I know that they reopened the beaches last weekend. For those of us, or just in Jacksonville, or I don't know where it was.
Yeah,
for those of us not. Yeah, for those of us not there, that seems crazy. But do people there feel like, oh, it's about time? Thank God that the beaches are open.
No, what's interesting here? I mean, it really depends. Where you're at in Florida. Specifically, I'm more like in the Tampa, Bay Area. So we're not like horribly locked down to begin with, but
yeah, my dad and his wife live there, and yeah, there's levels of the distancing and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, he's and they're all so they restrictions. I think they're helpful.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, I think definitely here, kind of even amongst Floridians, people are kind of like, are we sure that people should be gathering at the beach? Already. I mean, I understand. Some people feel locked in, but it's like, okay, maybe we shouldn't be, opening up the beaches.
Yeah, I think if the beach is open and there's like, 6 people spread out over like the whole beach, I'm sure it's fine. But when you start crowding, that gets to be a problem. Look, I read that Texas is going to do some reopening at the end of the week or at the beginning of the month. And when I read the headline, I'm like, oh no, that sounds really dangerous. And you kind of read what they're doing and you're like, all right, so stores are open, but you can only do curbside pickup. So I guess you're still ordering online. All right. So you can, and schools are still closed, and you can see like, all right, so that's a step that they feel comfortable making. And there's these 3 tiers of sort of reopening the economy. And I think that what people are missing is like, look, if the first tier doesn't go well, then you don't move on to the second tier. If the first tier does go well and you feel comfortable, it's fine. But I think that it's I think that it's smart that President Trump very quickly did the about face of, well, obviously governors get to decide what happens in their states. I mean, I'm not even a constitutional scholar. I've never even read the whole thing, but I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure that he doesn't get to just decide that that's what happens. And somebody got his ear and told him. But so it's like, look, Texas feels comfortable doing it. See how it goes. I've seen some stats about Texas that make me think, look, it might work. But then if it doesn't, people need to be ready for like, no, you told us we could go outside. So I don't, look, I know Florida had spring breakers in the middle of March, and a lot of them started to get sick once they went home. And it's like, okay, do you think that maybe that was a mistake? And then it's like, oh, but let's open this beach. I'm like, all right, I mean, see what happens. But you don't want to let people fail on a big level when there's this many lives potentially at stake. Usually it's like, well, that's the government. The government can do whatever they want. But it's like, you don't want people to die in large numbers. You shouldn't want that.
Well, I mean, I will say this kind of to put an asterisk with the spring breakers getting sick in Florida. There's always the question of, okay, did they get sick because of coronavirus, or did they get sick because they drank too much, and snorted too many lines of Coke, or
Yeah, look, we know that some of the spring breakers caught coronavirus. What they're not focusing on is how many of them have herpes and chlamydia, and we didn't focus on that at all. So yeah, spring break behavior is definitely very risky, but. The point is, look, I mean, and the point has been made that New Orleans shouldn't have held Mardi Gras, I mean, and that governor knew about it. They knew, they were given the advice, like, we don't think we should do it. And I can also understand making the decision in the middle of February, though, because it's like, yeah, it doesn't seem that bad. So they're telling me not to, but they're probably just being, overly cautious. And I think that the thing that I like least in this narrative is basically, and I'll call out the organization that I saw with this headline. It's somebody I usually like, but the Federalist had a story that was circulating. Is like, should we shut down the country for New York City? And I'm like, well, that's bullshit, because it's not just New York City. You're having people who are at risk all over the whole country. You have South Dakota that never closed down, and their numbers continue to go up. So it's like, look, something should be tried in order to save people's lives. And it's not just for New York City. New York City is the worst case scenario. Things aren't great here in Southern California. It's slowed down. It's better. And what I said to my wife when we first started staying in was, I'm like, well, look, when the numbers start to not be what they predicted, then people are going to be like, see, it wasn't as bad as they told us it was going to be. It's like, well, sure. But also, is it better because people, when I go to the grocery store, I'm going to wear a mask later. Maybe I'll tweet out a picture. People will see how handsome I am in my mask. But it's like, I don't know how much they help, but it's like, well, it doesn't hurt me to wear a mask at the grocery store, so I'm just going to do it, and it's like, I understand people worry about the Bill of Rights and their rights and all that, but at the same time, it's like, we're not being kept inside at gunpoint. There aren't militias, patrolling to make sure people aren't on the streets. And I haven't heard stories about people being stopped like, hey, where are you going? Oh, I'm going to the supermarket. All right. Because, by the way, if the cops stop you and ask where you're going, just say you're going to the supermarket. We're allowed to go there.
Yeah.
So even if you're going somewhere you shouldn't be, just say that. Even if you're going to your friend's house to get high, you say you're going to the supermarket. So I don't know. And I don't know what the right answers are. I do think that the answers lie within each of these states. And I think California and New York are in the situations where they're like, we're not ready to even roll out phase one of this, at least for 3 more weeks, maybe more than that, though.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mention Drudge, though, and and that whole thing with the headlines, because the one thing that has also kind of been curious, and I think I asked maybe Dennis this once on one of the AMAs that you did with him, but I can't remember. The one thing that has kind of shocked me a bit is the rise of InfoWars, kind of as like a
boy. First of all, we're talking about InfoWars and Alex Jones, the PrisonPlanet.net. What a great cartoon character that guy is. Unfortunately, he's a real person, and people believe what he says. And I mean, look, you can argue that somebody like Rush Limbaugh. I was going to say Trump's up, but that's a pun now in this day and age. Do people like one Rush, Tucker Carlson, but also like even your Bill Maher's, do they amp up what they believe for the sake of what they do? Absolutely. I believe that. You're going to be a little bit more vehement about what you believe in because you're, 1, entertaining, and 2, informing people. But I don't believe for a second that Alex Jones believes anything that comes out of his mouth. I don't think that he thinks that there's lizard people. I don't think he believes in Pizzagate. By the way, of all the things he talks about, the lizard people is probably the most believable, by the way. I wouldn't be surprised if there were lizard people that live beneath the surface and, maybe they plant a coronavirus in China, I mean, sure. The lizard people are trying to divide us. Yeah, it's interesting because InfoWars it's been deplatformed so many times, and it's like, I don't know. I guess it's because people don't take it as entertainment. I find him highly entertaining.
Oh yeah, so do I.
Yeah, but I think that a lot of people don't understand that it's entertainment. It's like, it's like a callback to wrestling. It's like people who used to think wrestling was real, and then they changed it to sports entertainment. Well, it's InfoWars. It's infotainment, I guess, a phrase that we used to use a lot more. But yeah, and I think that when you get even conspiracy theories asked in a way that gives them legitimacy. I love when reporters do stuff like, in a briefing, ask President Trump if Joe Exotic from Tiger King should be pardoned. I think that's funny. I'm like, good. Like, yeah, look, we had all the serious questions. And to be fair, his son had been on Jim Norton and Sam Roberts' show the day before. And Don Jr. had said, like, oh, come on, we got to get him a pardon. I'll see if I can talk to my dad. So it was like a legitimate news-based question, but it's also silly. And I'm like, well, that's fine.
Yeah.
That doesn't bother me. But then when it's like, if you were to ask, like, well, what kind of investigation is going on into Pizzagate? And I'm like, Pizzagate from like 4+ years ago? I'm like, I don't know. Even if it's real, you haven't heard much about it. So it's like, is there a demand for Pizzagate for people that aren't part of the New World Order and the global establishment? It's just like, all right, I don't know. It's there's some buzzwords that as soon as they come out of somebody's mouth, it's like it's hard to listen to what they have to say.
Yeah, well, I know that when I when I talked to Larry O'Connor about it, privately, he can't stand Alex Jones simply because Alex was one of the first people that propagated the whole Andrew Breitbart was assassinated.
We got a call like that on the radio show, and I actually remember the name of the person who called. I don't know his last name, but his name was Ferris in Connecticut, and I remember I was so angry. And I at least was able to turn it into a joke. This was when Dennis was hosting too, and I usually don't take over like that. And I was like, "How about you go Ferris yourself?" It made me so mad because it belittles what happened, which is tragic and just really sad that Andrew's heart gave out. I mean, it's like sure, were there people that would have liked him to not talk anymore? Yeah. But that's not what happened. And that's the upsetting thing. And yeah, I mean, and Alex Jones sending people to which school shooting was that? There've been so many, unfortunately.
Sandy Hook.
Sandy Hook. So having people go and talk to the Sandy Hook parents whose kids were assassinated, and I don't care where you stand on gun control and what there should be and what there shouldn't be, that the idea that those parents had to live through that is so heartbreaking. I have 2 small kids. I can't imagine having to get that realization, and then having people tell you that it didn't happen when it happened. It's just like what does he get from that? I think, like, if he wants to go on his radio show and say that it didn't happen, that's one thing, but it's like you're having these poor grieving parents that are being accosted about it because you have a show on YouTube that isn't even on YouTube anymore because YouTube deplatformed you.
I think though, and this is kind of the other interesting thing though, because when he went on Joe Rogan's podcast a few months ago now, or like at the end of last year, and I've actually looked this up. He says that he never actually propagated that, but I guess listeners of his show, for whatever reason, and this is the other problem with having like a large audience, is even if you don't say something, members of your audience will say stuff anyway and then say that you said it.
Yeah, well, look, it's the same argument I made before about why you don't tweet out "Liberate Michigan." because it's like, that's just like, well, you didn't actually do it, but you kind of encouraged it. And look, I don't know what he said and what he didn't say, but everybody seems to point to the fact that that was a narrative on his show.
Yeah.
And maybe it starts because people call in and think it doesn't happen. And he's like, well, yeah, that's interesting. But I mean, he would get people in press conferences during the Obama administration and ask about like false flags and things like this. There are all these code words for, and so it's like, I don't know. I think that people should have free speech to say whatever they want. But at the same time, the way that it's perceived can be dangerous. So, I don't quite know how you get a disclaimer on something, and I mean, it's like, I know that pro-Trump people, it drove them crazy, but, CNN started doing these chyrons underneath a Trump press conference. I think it was a week and a half ago. And it was very editorializing, but it's like, well, yeah, but basically he's throwing a temper tantrum right now. So why don't you call it out? He showed a propaganda video. He showed a campaign video, to during a briefing like this. So it's like, all right, well, you're calling it out, and I don't know if it's right, but I understand the intention of it, and I don't know what the answer is. But CNN is not the place to necessarily go for the answers. But I think that that was a missed opportunity for CNN, just in general, not that specific instance, because I think you talk to most people. Fox is the news channel that's on the right. MSNBC is the one on the left. If CNN had become the one that's actual news, I think a lot of people on both sides would have been like, oh, but at least I can count on that. Too many people want the echo chamber of like, I want to hear what I agree with. And I think that that's also dangerous in its own way. But Alex Jones is dangerous in a completely different way. So I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is. I think that people need to go to Sam Whitfield in the Bladtcast. That's where all their information should come from.
Yes, I agree. So with that, we're almost at 2 hours. So
or as we call on the Bladtcast, halftime.
Yeah, the past, present, future hour, as Dennis used to mention.
Oh yeah, we used to do on the radio.
So whenever you're listening to this in the past, present, future hour, I hope you guys enjoy this. So, at Animate Christian, just again, where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at ChristianDMZ. I like to post a lot of pictures of my kids because that seems to make people happy right now, because they're 4 and 2, so they don't quite grasp what's really going on. They just know things are a little different. They still manage to have fun and play in the driveway. Unfortunately, we do take a walk. We put these little masks on them when they walk now because we're like, well, it doesn't hurt. And, so I guess that's they still manage to have a lot of fun, and that's great because I'd love to be having more fun than I am right now. But a place where you can find fun is the Bladtcast, and the easiest way to go is just bladtcast.com, BLADTCAST.com. That'll have the links to everything. And I'm doing, Bladtcast has predominantly always been audio only, but because I'm doing a lot of the interviews on Zoom, I have video versions of a lot of these conversations that are on the Bladtcast YouTube channel, and we're finding that we're getting, a lot more subscriptions than we had in the past. We're getting new people who are finding the channel because I'm tweeting out the videos. And the other show I'll mention is Popcorn Talk Network on YouTube. Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Marvel movie news. We still have fun. We still talk about superheroes and comics and movies and stuff. So check that out. And I do have a show called The Trump Report on AfterBuzz TV. That is Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. People in your audience might not agree with the other panelists, but I hope they appreciate that I try to have an honest conversation with them. And I tell jokes at the beginning of the show, so I try to have fun.
If you ever need like a center right guy to come on and kind of play Trump's advocate, feel free to ping me.
I'll take you up on that at some point. I think that would be great. So but Sam, thank you so much for having me on, and I appreciate you first of all being generous with your time. I was happy to talk this long because it's this is what I do in my little bunk my little bunker down here is talking so much, and I'm glad we finally got to do it.
Yeah.
It took a lot of planning, and let's not wait 4 more years before we do it again.
Yeah, and I'm always happy to come on the Bladtcast too. I've been on there I think twice now, but
Oh, it's funny because I would have thought you'd been on more times, but yeah, we'll figure out a good angle. Have you on? We'll certainly have you back on soon.
so. All right, Christian. Well, thanks for coming on, and folks, thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode in the past, present, future hour. So, thanks everyone.
Bye, everyone.